I found out my CEO husband had been hiding a secret from me the same day his executive team voted to remove me from the company I helped build. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply thanked everyone for their time, closed my notebook, and walked out of the boardroom. They exchanged smug smiles, convinced they had won. What none of them knew was that the biggest mistake of their lives had already been made. If you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll understand why that meeting changed every one of our lives. And before we get too far, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. My name is Claire. I'm 36 years old, and for years, people assumed I was just the CEO's wife. I rarely corrected them. It was easier to let them underestimate me than to explain that I'd helped write the original business plan on a tiny apartment kitchen table, worked through countless sleepless nights, and quietly built systems that kept the company alive during its hardest years. When my husband, Daniel, became the public face of the business, I stepped back by choice. I preferred contracts to cameras, spreadsheets to speeches. That decision made me invisible. And invisible people hear things. As I reached the parking garage after that humiliating meeting, my phone vibrated. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't anyone from the board. The caller ID displayed the name of the company's oldest corporate attorney, a man who had retired 6 months earlier and hadn't contacted me in over a year. His first words stopped me cold. "Claire, don't go home. There's something your husband never wanted you to discover." I froze beside my car, staring at the phone. The attorney, Mr. Harrison, had always been careful with his words. If he sounded nervous, there was a reason. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "Bring every document you still have from the company's early days. And whatever you do, don't tell Daniel we spoke." The line went dead. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I drove to my old office instead, a small consulting suite I still kept for personal projects. Inside a locked cabinet were dusty folders from the company's first year. Partnership drafts. Investor agreements. Handwritten notes from late-night planning sessions. Most people thought those papers were sentimental. I knew better. As I waited, my phone buzzed again. "Daniel. Where are you?" his message read. "We need to talk." I replied with only 3 words. "I'm still working." It wasn't a lie. 20 minutes later, Mr. Harrison walked in carrying a sealed envelope that looked as though it had been sitting untouched for years. His face was pale. "I've been debating whether to give you this," he admitted. "But after today's board meeting, I don't have a choice anymore." He slid the envelope across the table. Written on the front, in the handwriting I recognized instantly, were the words, "Open only if Claire is ever removed from the company." My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. Daniel had never mentioned this envelope. Neither had anyone on the board. Inside was a notarized letter, a certified copy of an agreement, and one sentence highlighted in yellow. "The true controlling ownership of the company shall automatically transfer upon evidence of deliberate concealment or fraudulent removal." I looked up at Mr. Harrison. He nodded once. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Claire, your husband was never the majority owner." And at that exact moment, someone began pounding on my office door. The pounding echoed through my office. 3 sharp knocks. Then 3 more. I didn't move. Mr. Harrison quietly stood, glanced through the frosted glass, and stepped back with a concerned expression. "It's Daniel," he whispered. "And he's not alone." I calmly slipped the envelope into my briefcase and locked it. Let them wait. Daniel had spent years believing confidence could replace preparation. It often worked in boardrooms. It wasn't going to work here. His voice came through the door. Claire, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to fix this. Fix this. Only an hour earlier, he'd sat silently while the board stripped me of my position. Not once had he objected. Not once had he looked in my direction. Now he suddenly wanted to talk. I opened the door just enough to face him. Behind him stood the chief financial officer and the head of human resources. Neither could meet my eyes. Daniel forced a smile. Today's meeting got out of hand. Let's go home and discuss everything privately. I folded my arms. I think we are past private conversations. His smile faded. Claire, who have you been talking to? Interesting. He wasn't asking how I was. He wasn't apologizing. He wanted to know what I knew. I've been reviewing old company records, I answered calmly. For the first time in years, I watched genuine fear flash across his face. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. He knew exactly which records I meant. Without another word, he turned to the CFO. Cancel tomorrow's board meeting, he ordered. The CFO hesitated. I can't. Daniel frowned. What do you mean you can't? The CFO swallowed hard. Because the bank froze the executive authorization accounts 30 minutes ago. Silence filled the hallway. Daniel looked at me as if I had orchestrated it. I hadn't. At least, not yet. Before anyone could speak again, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of the company's primary bank manager. I answered. His first sentence made everyone standing outside my office go completely still. Miss Claire, we've received instructions to recognize you as the only authorized controlling owner, pending verification of one original document. I slowly looked down at the sealed agreement in my briefcase. Daniel's face turned white. For a long moment, no one spoke. Daniel stared at my briefcase, as if he already knew what was inside. I thanked the bank manager and said, I'll be there within the hour. When I ended the call, Daniel finally found his voice. Claire, whatever's in that envelope, we can work this out. I looked at him calmly. Can we? He stepped closer. You've misunderstood something. No, I replied. I think I've understood everything for the first time. I walked past him without another word. He didn't try to stop me. An hour later, I sat in a private conference room at the bank with the manager, Mr. Harrison, and two corporate attorneys. I placed the sealed envelope on the table. The original agreement was carefully removed, examined, and compared with archived corporate records. Every signature matched. Every notarized seal was authentic. Then came the clause no one in the room had expected. Years ago, before Daniel had become CEO, our first investor had insisted on one condition. Since I had created the company's financial structure and owned the core intellectual property, 51% of the voting shares would remain legally protected in my name through a confidential trust. Daniel had been appointed CEO. I had remained the controlling owner. The agreement also contained one final safeguard. If any CEO intentionally concealed the ownership structure or attempted to remove the majority owner through deception, the board's actions became automatically void, and an independent investigation had to begin immediately. Mr. Harrison quietly closed the folder. The board never knew, he said. Daniel never told them. Just then, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Daniel. It was the chairwoman of the board. Her voice was shaking. Claire, we've just discovered several financial transfers authorized by Daniel over the past 8 months. I closed my eyes for a second. So it wasn't just the secret ownership, I said. No, she whispered. It's much worse. She paused before saying the words that changed the investigation completely. We think company money has disappeared. I arrived at the company's headquarters the next morning before sunrise. The building was unusually quiet. The same executives who had ignored me the day before now stood outside the boardroom, avoiding eye contact. I didn't enjoy seeing them uncomfortable. I simply wanted the truth. The independent forensic auditors had worked through the night. Stacks of reports covered the conference table. Bank transfers, shell companies, consulting invoices, and email chains painted a picture none of us expected. Daniel hadn't stolen money for a lavish lifestyle. He had been desperately trying to hide massive losses from a risky acquisition he'd approved without consulting anyone. Each transfer was meant to keep the illusion alive until next quarter. But every cover-up created another one. When the auditors finished, the board voted unanimously. Daniel was removed as CEO, the financial misconduct was reported to the authorities, and every decision made to force me out was officially reversed. Several executives admitted they had trusted Daniel without verifying the facts. They resigned before the investigation was complete. Daniel asked to speak with me one last time. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. I believed he meant it. But good intentions don't erase deception. You didn't lose the company because of one bad decision, I told him. You lost it because every lie required another. I walked away without anger. Only clarity. Over the following year, I rebuilt the company with a new leadership team focused on transparency instead of ego. Employees who had feared speaking up finally had a voice. The business became stronger than it had ever been, not because of one person, but because trust had returned. Looking back, I realized something important. People underestimated me because I stayed in the background. They assumed silence meant weakness. They couldn't have been more wrong. What would you have done if you had discovered your spouse had hidden a secret that changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more incredible stories.